Let's listen to Pavarotti.
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. So, as a disclaimer, this channel is for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions about your slander. We'll provide information, and I will give you my opinion on the information I provide. Now, my opinion is mine, and mine alone. So let's get into it. Okay, so in this one, we're going to break down one of the motions to suppress. We're going to break down the wiretap and the track and trace, the pin register. This one is the easiest one for me to break down because for those of you that have been with me for a long time, this is probably not going to be shocking information for you. This is going to reaffirm what I have said in the past. There may be a few new things. For those of you that haven't been with me for a long time, this is probably going to be a shocking revelation to you. So, without further ado, let's just get right into it. Okay, so you can see that this is the motion to suppress and memorandum in support of the pin, trap, and trace device. And you'll see that comes now Bryan C. Kohberger, buying through his attorneys of records. We submit the following memorandum in support of his contemporaneously filed motion for an order suppressing all data found by law enforcement from its search of his AT&T account and tracing his phone usage. That is going to be important as we get down here. And this is all the documents in support of them throwing it out, but we're going to skip down here to the facts. Now remember that on December 23rd, and I'm not reading this, I'm talking now, but on December 23rd, Corporal Payne, along with the FBI special agents, that's the day that they first got approved a warrant for 48 hours of data from Bryan Kohberger's phone. Later on that day, according to them, according to Cy Ray in court, that was really fast for them to go ahead and get a second search warrant. But according to them, later on that day, once they received that information, then a second search warrant was issued. And this is why that is very, very important. This is why I believe Cy Ray made that statement in court. That, yeah, to go through the cell site data and get the information needed to get the second warrant would have been time consuming, and he didn't think they could do it in a day. And my contention has always been that's because they weren't focused on the cell site activity. They were focused on his phone calls and text messages. I believe this is going to corroborate, validate what I've said in the past. On December 23rd, 2023, Corporal Payne of the Moscow Police Department requested a warrant to search the contents of Mr. Kohberger's AT&T account for information regarding his phone's whereabouts between November 12, 2022 and November 14th, 2022. And then you're going to see it says also as well as messages and phone calls during that period. That is very, very important. Keep that in mind because that's going to come into play here in just a few minutes very strongly. However, the affidavit and warrant went beyond that range. After that warrant was granted, law enforcement received information from AT&T. This new information is included in the affidavit for a new warrant sought for both account information as well as a pin trap for Mr. Kohberger's phone. The exhibit affidavit was, like the previous search warrant, signed by Corporal Payne. So they get the first warrant, and they explain to the judge in the affidavit that they're trying to establish his whereabouts as well as messages and phone calls during that period. The whereabouts are one thing, the messages and phone calls, those are going to end up being a whole nother ballgame here in a minute. But then based on what they received back, they got a second search warrant. This time, they were looking for more account information as well as adding a pin trap for Mr. Kohberger's phone. Now, a pin trap, as we are going to learn, actually monitors text messages and phone calls. And we'll get into that here in just a minute. Now, the basic facts Corporal Payne used to support the search warrant were essentially the same, but with the following added. Cell tower records did not show Mr. Kohberger was in Moscow at the time of the murders. In law enforcement's experience, however, people committing crimes typically turn off their phones. So the cell tower records did not show that he was in the area. Remember, everybody's thinking that they've got CSLI data that shows him, it's going to show him somehow in the area the night of the atrocity. It's never going to be there. There isn't any cell tower data for the time of the atrocity. But they said, well, you know, they typically turn off their phones, was their excuse. Now, the new information received from the previous warrant, according to FBI special agents that specialize in the analysis of historical CSLI, cell site location information, showed that on November 13th at approximately 2:42 a.m., Mr. Kohberger's phone was utilizing cellular resources that provide coverage to his apartment in Pullman, Washington. They support the idea that he left his apartment and went south. They supported the phone being off. They support at 4:48 a.m. the phone is south of Moscow near Blaine. The phone utilizes resources that make their way back to Pullman, coinciding with a white Elantra on some surveillance there. Similar data showing occurs at approximately 9 a.m. with a trip to Moscow and returning around 9:32 a.m. Okay, so the language here is very important. Okay, and this is the defense writing this, right? It says they support the idea he left his apartment and went south. They support it, which means that they are valid in what they are stating to get this second warrant. They supported the phone being off. They supported the phone being off by using the CSLI data and by using video footage of the launcher's movements. So they're saying they concede, they supported everything they needed in the second search warrant. That is not where the issue comes in, folks. And you'll see, but the Fourth Amendment and Article 1, Section 17 protect people's interest in privacy. A person challenging a search has the burden of showing that he or she had a legitimate expectation of privacy in the item or place searched. Okay, down here it says, here, at stake are records of a telephone account. Okay, so this is what they're stating, the defense. Here's what's at stake. Here's what we want suppressed. At stake are records of a telephone account. The records the state sought included identifying information about account owner and their devices, device purchase information, email addresses associated with the account, call detail records, including text messages and data activity. Now, we heard in the hearing many times Cy Ray requesting call detail records because the call detail records helps you to pinpoint somebody's location. They do that through pings. Now, folks, where do these pings come from? Pings come from when somebody uses their phone. And that includes sending text messages and making calls. The text messages and the phone calls, the data activity, are what the defense really wants suppressed in this motion. And then it's got the cell site information, historical location information, cloud data, and timing advanced reports. But let's keep reading and I'll verify what I'm asserting. And the Fourth Amendment has generally refused to acknowledge a privacy interest in records held by a corporation about communications they facilitate. But you can see it says compiling cases and concluding, every circuit to have considered the question has held that an individual has no reasonable expectation of privacy in a phone service provider's records of the phone number he has dialed or from which he has received calls. However, In Carpenter, the Supreme Court declined to extend the third-party doctrine to historical cell site records and cell site location information. So what that means is compiling cases and concluding every circuit to have considered the question has held that an individual has no reasonable expectation of privacy in a phone service provider's records of the phone number he has dialed or from which he has received calls. So the numbers he has dialed or has received calls, and I imagine that extends to text messages now in this new age, those are protected. However, the Supreme Court declined to extend third-party doctrine to historical cell site records and cell site location information. So that means third-party doctrine doesn't exist for the cell site. So that's not something that they could get suppressed. They're not worried about his location data, the CSLI data. They're worried about the text messages and the phone calls. In this matter, Corporal Payne specified in his request that the purpose for gathering the information from AT&T records was to aid in determining the location of the 8458 phone and the white Elantra in efforts to determine whether the white Elantra is the same vehicle identified in the surveillance videos. Pursuant to Carpenter, to the extent that information was being gathered for the movements of the vehicle, Mr. Kohberger has a privacy right protected by the Fourth Amendment and Article 1, Section 17. But what is his privacy right? In the wake of Carpenter, the court's recognition of the abundant records maintained on everyone in modern society, it is questionable whether third-party doctrine is still good law. Now, pay close attention to this. It is questionable whether third-party doctrine is still good law. So that is an argument that would go after amending constitutional law, which they've already learned with Judge Hippler. He's not going to fly with being a nuanced judge and making nuanced rulings. So notice what they did right here. However, this court need not consider whether the Fourth Amendment needs updating. So don't even worry about that argument. They're super judge that won't do nuanced decisions, because Idaho has already recognized an expectation in the privacy of whom we dial and the content of text messages we send. The whole point to getting this warrant suppressed is because of who we dial and the text messages we send. State versus Thompson. Now I'm going to sum this up, really this entire argument right here, because I'm very familiar with State versus Thompson, and this is Ann Taylor's favorite one really to cite. So think about everything I just said that we talked about in this, and now we're going to go to State versus Thompson. Okay, in State versus Thompson, you'll see the appellant, Judy Thompson, seeks review of a decision of the Idaho Court of Appeals in State versus Thompson, which reversed an order of the district court suppressing evidence obtained by means of a wiretap of Thompson's telephone. We affirm the decision of the Court of Appeals, except its holdings that the installation of a PIN register on Thompson's telephone line did not constitute a search within the meaning of Article 1:17 of the Idaho Constitution. Remember, that's what Ann Taylor keeps referring to, Article 1:17 of the Idaho Constitution, and that there was probable cause for issuing the wiretap orders. We hold that the use of a PIN register is a search under Article 1:17 of the Idaho Constitution, that the evidence produced by the PIN register should not have been considered in the issuance of the wiretap orders, and that without the PIN register evidence, there was no probable cause to issue the wiretap orders. Therefore, we reverse the decision of the Court of Appeals on these issues and affirm the order of the district court suppressing the evidence obtained from the wiretap of Thompson's telephone. So what that means is Thompson had two warrants issued on her. One was for a pen register and one was for a wiretap. Now, there was probable cause for the wiretap, they said, because of the information that the pen register gave them. But because there wasn't sufficient probable cause for the pen register, then the pen register was not a warrant that should have been issued. Therefore, fruit of the poisonous tree, the information from the pen register would not have been able to be used to get the wiretap. Therefore, both of the warrants are suppressed. So that is what we're talking about here in this one. And let me show you what I mean as we go further, because remember, there was two warrants. The second one, they said, had merit because of the CSLI data. The second one had merit because of the text messages and phone calls that it received. It did not have any merit because of the CSLI data, because he wasn't in the area at the time of the atrocity. So what else does this State versus Thompson tell us? It also tells us that in its decision in this case, the Court of Appeals used the term pen register to refer to a device that is used to record the numbers called on a telephone and to a dialed number recorder, DNR, that also records the duration of all calls. This is what they mean by trap and trace. The Court of Appeals noted that from the record, it appears that the equipment installed to monitor Thompson's phone actually was a DNR rather than a pen register, but that the impact of the two devices on the target's privacy is generally similar. And then it goes on to talk a little bit more about how that's definitely needed for a search warrant. So what were they putting on Kohberger's phone? Was it something so they could figure out where he was? No, that's why Cy Ray said in court, I don't know why they would need this sophisticated equipment, because they already had surveillance on Kohberger when they got this warrant. So why would they need this sophisticated equipment? Because they were monitoring his text messages and his phone calls. I will tell you at the end what my summation of all of this is, but it should start to paint a picture in your mind as of now. Now we go on to read that 2 wiretap orders were issued by the district court authorizing the wiretap of Thompson's telephone. The affidavit that was offered in support of the application for the first wiretap order stated that the data obtained from the pen register installed on Thompson's telephone line indicated that Thompson was contacting a residence in the Twin Falls area where a drug supplier lived or frequented. The affidavit also stated that the pen register data indicated that Thompson was contacting females who were making visits to the Idaho State Penitentiary, the location where law enforcement authorities believed drugs were being delivered. In addition, the affidavit indicated that the data obtained from the pen register showed a high frequency of phone use by Thompson, 1,100 calls in 43 days, excluding calls to or from Thompson's place of work. The officer making the affidavit concluded that Thompson's phone activity was comparable to the frequency of calls of other drug traffickers and that Thompson was using the telephone to distribute or sell illicit drugs. Other than this information that was the result of the use of the pen register, there was no information contained in the affidavit indicating that Thompson was using her telephone to conduct any drug-related activities. The officer who made the affidavit stated parenthetically, because of the very large geographical distances between Judy Thompson and her probable source of illicit drugs in the Twin Falls area, the likelihood of the use of the telephone to conduct transactions increases. So what it's saying is the only information they used to get the second search warrant in Thompson was the information they received from the pen register that they got from the first warrant. As you apply that to the Kohberger case, the only information that they used to get the second warrant was information from his first warrant. Since the information from his first warrant did not show that he was in the area at the time of the atrocity. The only other thing that could have been used to verify to get the second warrant would have been his calls and his text messages. However, here is why they're getting these warrants both suppressed. It's because of the information used to obtain the first warrant. And if the information used to obtain the first warrant is not valid, then the second warrant would have never been issued. Now, as we dive further in, we see it says substantial basis for probable cause, and they were talking about there was no substantial basis for probable cause because also the statement of the officer that various other independent sources of information, which it would go on to describe a confidential informant, confirmed that Thompson was using her telephone for dealing in marijuana, is not a substantial basis for probable cause since there is no indication of the veracity, reliability, or source of knowledge of these other sources. Because they did not produce the confidential informant, then the court cannot recognize if the confidential informant is reliable, if they're a good source of the information, or if they have veracity, because they did not name the confidential informant. It was an unnamed source. Does that sound familiar? And finally, it says the statement of the officer that various other independent sources of information confirmed that Thompson was using her telephone for dealing in marijuana is not a substantial basis for probable cause, since there is no indication of the veracity, reliability, or source of knowledge of these other sources. As this court pointed out in State versus Johnson Supra, even under the totality of circumstances test, the veracity, reliability, and basis of knowledge of the person supplying hearsay information are all highly relevant in determining the value of his report and in making the determination of probable cause. The judge's action cannot be a mere ratification of the bear. So what they're saying, once again, is an unnamed confidential informant's information cannot be used to get a search warrant. And that's what was used in the obtaining of the first search warrant in State versus Thompson. And that's also what was used in getting the first search warrant in State versus Kohberger. And because of the first search warrant and the judge not being able to check the reliability and veracity and knowledge of person supplying the hearsay information, then that warrant should not have been issued in the first place. So let's see if I can wrap this in a bow for you. To sum up, the suppression of the trap and trace warrant, the Officer Payne obtained a search warrant on December 23rd for 48 hours worth of data from Kohberger's phone. In the warrant, he stated he was trying to verify his location and verify his text messages and phone calls. That's what he was trying to verify in the warrant. When they received the information from AT&T, what did it show? It showed that he was not in the Moscow area at the time of the unalivings. So it didn't come back with information that he was trying to validate. However, it did come back with his text messages and phone calls. And for those of you that think I put together my 5-part series just off of wild imagination. Sorry, folks, it didn't. It came off mainly information that I have garnered from these court documents. So if he received information about his text messages and phone calls, and that was the majority of the information that was used to get the second search warrant, because his data on where he was didn't suffice, didn't show him there. It had to be his text messages and phone calls. So that tells me that he was text messaging and phone calling somebody. But it also tells me that person he was text messaging and phone calling wasn't Brett Kopaka. And I'll explain that later. Brett Kopaka, his connection to Kohberger, they were searching for over different warrants that we'll get into as we go along in this. So it tells me that it was him contacting his dealer, and that's why I say that it was Kohberger contacting Emma Bailey. Yes. But the whole crux of this is the first search warrant, the affidavit used to obtain it, if they put in there it was the IGG, well, the defense team has now had enough time to verify the IGG was reverse engineered and it wasn't complete at the time of obtaining this warrant. So that leaves them to their confidential informant statements. And if the first search warrant was issued based off of hearsay information from a confidential informant, the State versus Thompson has already ruled that because you cannot verify the reliability of that informant, that search warrant should not be issued. So as it relates to the Kohberger case, the first search warrant shouldn't have been issued. Therefore, the second search warrant, just like in State versus Thompson, would be null and void as well, because they wouldn't have the information for the second search warrant without the information garnered from the first. That is a lot of information for you to take in. Watch this thing a couple of times. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Paparazzi's out.